For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to The Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan, and this evening we are going to focus on free trade agreements, FTAs. Now, the government appears to be in a rush to sign FTAs with a number of countries. I have a small graphic for you to look at the number of countries we are lining up FTAs with. Top of the list is the United Arab Emirates, with which a deal could be signed perhaps as early as this month or maybe a little later. But they're the first in the queue. Then we have another one with the United Kingdom, which is being reported in the media. There is still some time off, but it's number 2 on the priority list. There's also one with Australia that is on the cards. And we have FTAs with the European Union and the US. Although these appear to be a little on the horizon, we have more time for that. My guest this evening is Rajat Kathuria. You all know him as earlier the chief executive of ICRIER. So first question, this government has been fairly jaundiced about FTAs. So what explains this current rush to sign FTAs?
You're right, Surya. I think when this government took office, there was a view, and I'm talking about in 2014, that FTAs hadn't served us well. And the manifestation was that most of the FTAs that we had signed had resulted in a current account deficit within the FTA, not with our all trading partners, but just within the FTA. And that was seen as a manifestation of our weakness in penetrating those markets and giving away market access we could have leveraged better. So current account deficits were used as a sign of weakness, or thought of as a sign of weakness. And therefore, they thought that FTAs hadn't served India well. And complementing that was another narrative that with non-FTA countries, we were actually running current account surpluses. And these examples were, of course, the EU and the United States, with whom we have traditionally had current account surpluses. So the narrative became, or the conclusion became, that FTAs are not good because we give away market access, and that with non-FTA countries, we are doing much better. And as I said, the metric to measure the success was the current account deficit. Of course, as economists, we know that's not a very good way of looking at a success or failure of an FTA, and I'll elaborate that during this conversation. But I think the new recognition is that, look, growth has stopped or has ceased to provide that fillip that we wanted growth to provide. And the engines of growth that traditionally fired the Indian economy, investment has slowed down, consumption, well, it's picking up post-pandemic, but it's also not doing as well as it was. So what's the other growth engine for the economy? It's really exports. So I think the realization is that to look at growth and to boost growth, we have to look at exports and export markets. And if we have to increase our exports, then one, we do it the traditional way, multilateral WTO route, where every country agrees to tariff reductions and trade facilitation. But we know that WTO is not working anymore. It's almost dead, if not already, it's dying, if not already dead. And it'll be a while before WTO comes up and begins to function as it was in the past. So I think FTAs are beginning to be seen within the country, within India, as drivers of growth. And within that, I think FTAs are seen as a route to propel that growth, given that growth engines are few now in the economy. So that's, I think, the major reason is to use trade as an engine of growth.
Is the international pressure on us in some form?
Well, there could be some pressure, given that India has sort of stayed away from big trade agreements. India and the US are only two countries which are big countries, democracies and trading countries, that are not part of a big regional agreement. I mean, the CPTPP as well as the RCEP, the US is out of the TPP as it was christened earlier, and the CTPP, and India is out of the RCEP. So India and US are two countries. So there is some pressure, I think local pressure as well, from domestic commentators that India should be a part of a trading agreement. It should look at FTAs afresh, given that we have lost out on not signing the RCEP, which means we've lost out to a market and we've lost out also to a source of investment from the RCEP, which could have come to India, which will now stay perhaps within the region, because within the RCEP, there'll be trade facilitation, there'll be investments, and I think a lot of the investment will stay there. And I dare say that facilitation of investment within the RCEP countries will be a lot easier to happen than in India. India, we know that, investment facilitation and investment, there's so many hurdles that you need to overcome. So being a part of RCEP would have been a source of investment. I think we can overcome some of those hurdles by reforming domestic policies and making trade facilitation and investment facilitation easier within India. But certainly, I think RCEP will have a cost, economic cost. Of course, the government has economic and political reasons for staying out of agreements, and there were probably political reasons triumphed economic reasons, and the political economy is important for governments in power. But given that we've stayed out of RCEP, necessitates that we look at alternative trade measures so that we can use trade to propel growth. And I think that's the major reason today that we are looking afresh at FTAs, is to begin to again use trade as an engine of growth. And I want to buttress this argument by saying that it is in India's sort of interest to be able to do that today. And the reason I say that, if you look at the history of economies before us that have used export markets to boost growth, be it United States, Europe, Japan, Korea, all the East Asian countries, and most recently China. Of course, they have benefited from a relatively open environment that India doesn't enjoy today. Protectionism has become the hallmark of the global economy today. Admittedly, we don't enjoy that openness that these countries I've named enjoyed before, but they all used global markets to become competitive domestically. And I don't think India can take any other route to become competitive. It's absolutely necessary that we go up that ladder. And to become competitive, we have to penetrate global and export markets. Unfortunately, as I said, Surya, global markets are becoming difficult to penetrate given the protection sentiment that is in the world today. But we need global markets much more than we have ever done. And I think this realization, along with the fact that we need to use exports as an engine of growth and to use export markets to boost our own competitiveness, I think these are the two compelling reasons. And maybe, political pressure, international pressure on being a part of a couple of big agreements is also, India is also feeling that pressure. But I think the first two, I would say, are the major reasons why we are doing that now.
So the significance of a trade agreement, FTA, with the UAE, it's a trading nation. It's not a manufacturing power. Does it gel?
So I think, again, in the larger context of what I said about India losing out of a lot of investment possibilities by not joining the RCEP, we are looking now also west. We've looked east, we've acted east. And I think we're looking at not only the UAE, but we're looking at Oman, and we're looking at some of the other countries there. And I think what the interest there is to sort of, UAE is one of our very large trade markets. In fact, it's the fourth largest export market for India, and there's a huge diaspora there. So culturally, we have ties in the UAE, plus in other Middle East countries. There's a huge Indian diaspora, and I think we can tap that diaspora for investments within India. We can use managerial know-how, we can get technology into the country from these countries. So I think it does make sense. It is a trading economy, but by forging better economic linkages with UAE and with other Middle Eastern countries, we will also find markets for our own sort of goods and services, especially the comparative advantage that we enjoy in services and labor. We can use that to invest in UAE and export to the UAE. So I think there are synergistic advantages both for UAE as well as for India to forge greater economic ties. Of course, the anchor will always be petroleum and petroleum products. And there's significant power of our trading regime is petroleum and petroleum products. But there are services as well. And then, of course, the traditional items like engineering goods, automobiles, agricultural products, as well as gems and jewelry. So there's a two-way trade in gems and jewelry between India and the UAE. So reduction of tariff barriers, greater trade facilitation will give a bigger bang for the buck. Trade will be a sort of a non-zero sum game. And I think there is a pressure from the UAE as well, from the diaspora, to increase relations between UAE and India, trading relations between UAE and India.
So how does one keep Chinese goods out? That's a huge concern here, isn't it?
I know. And in fact, if you look at UAE and India's trade relations with the UAE, one of the things that we are going to sort of negotiate very hard and very closely is the rules of origin. And there is going to be a limit, there's going to be a minimum limit of local value added before it can qualify to become a UAE described good or characterized good, which means that at least X% of the value addition will have to happen in the UAE. The fear being that a lot of Chinese goods and a lot of Chinese exports into the UAE could find their way into India if we have a trade agreement with the UAE. So rules of origin are going to be an important item of negotiation between India and the UAE. Having said that, it's not possible for India in the short term to diversify away from China, because if you look at the Chinese trade with India, China has become India's largest trading partner. And if you look at the trade with China, a lot of it is intermediate goods. So if you're going to shut off trade, if you're going to close the tap or increase tariffs, you're actually harming your own domestic industry, and you're harming your own sort of aspiration of becoming a manufacturing hub in the world, which is, Make in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat. The reason why we've become anywhere near a manufacturing country, we are not a manufacturing powerhouse. We may be a service powerhouse, but we are not a manufacturing powerhouse. But our movement along the way to become a manufacturing powerhouse has been based on our liberalizing imports since 1991. The fact that we have been able to import cheaper means that we've been able to produce more efficiently, which means that we've been able to export better. In fact, one of the biggest exports to UAE is electronic products and mobile phones. And if you look at the value added, domestic value added, while they are increasing, it is still consists of a lot of foreign value added in those phones before they are exported. The point being, import dependence of our exports is fairly high. Of course, we want to reduce that, but you can't reduce that overnight without compromising your competitiveness. And if we do that overnight, if we diversify away from China very quickly, then we will hurt our own competitiveness and our ability to become a manufacturing hub. Having said that, studies show that we can actually find alternative destinations from which we can import the same products from China that we do from China, and we can diversify away. Some of them we can domesticate, some of them we can diversify away, but we'll have to do it in a calibrated way, given that China is a source of a lot of components and intermediate goods, especially electronics. So we have to be careful. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We've seen that in financial markets. Don't invest in one stock. It's very risky. Diversify your portfolio. Diversify your import portfolio by all means, but do it in a way that doesn't compromise your own competitiveness and interest. And I think we can do that, given that we have a lot of intellectual sort of knowledge that has been created on our ability to do that. And a lot of research is available now among think tanks to be able to do that in a sensible and a clever way.
Now, are we being realistic about having limited FTAs? And that's the buzz one hears all the time.
Right. I mean, all FTAs, you have early harvests, right? I mean, every FTA you sign, you think about an early harvest, what you can leverage quickly, and you put it as an early harvest. It's pretty much like the sort of infant industry argument, if you will. You protect the industry for a while and then hope that it will become big and will be able to compete not only domestically, but also internationally. And we found in the Indian context, especially in the 60s and 70s, the infant never grew up. And you never were able to move out of the protectionism, and you became a product of that protectionism. I'm sort of trying to use that analogy with early harvest FTAs, especially, we have had one with Thailand, and we've never sort of graduated to a full-scale FTA, but we have that experience before us. So it's a good idea. You can't do everything in one fell swoop. Even in your SEPAs or comprehensive economic agreements, you don't do everything in one fell sweep. There is a sort of phasing in of the tariff reductions. So even in an FTA, you phase in your tariff reductions, you do some early harvests and hope that you'll be able to sign a deal later on. So I don't find anything wrong in the conceptually that you could have these minilaterals or these mini trade deals. But it's really the sort of extension to a full FTA that becomes a cause of concern, which is the implementation. It's just, go ahead and do the small or early harvests and then progress to a bigger trade deal. And that's, I think, there's nothing wrong in doing that. We should only see a conclusion of that deal and not let them sort of wither away into the future. Yeah.
So last question. The FTAs with the EU and the US. I understand the US is not very keen. The EU apparently is, but it's been going on for years. So what's your take on that?
Yes, I think, when a country is like India, emerging country like India, which is now changing its stance because of domestic compulsions in FTAs, then of course you look at a whole host of FTAs. And just like an early harvest deal within an FTA, you look at the easy things first, what is called the low-hanging fruit, and you try and leverage the low-hanging fruit. I think within FTAs also, we'll try and leverage the low-hanging fruit before we get to countries like the United States, which I think, as you rightly said, looks difficult as of now. EU, the negotiations have been going on for a while, so I think EU is easier than the US. If you ask me, and because we've already covered a lot of ground, and there's interest in the EU and interest in India to try and conclude a comprehensive trade agreement, because as I said, it will be mutually beneficial for both countries, both regions, and India is a subcontinental region. So I mean, EU is looking at India as the market for automobiles, the markets for wines, the market for dairy products, and India is looking at the EU as a source of investment, twinning of its cities, sustainable investment in climate technology, and we are also, of course, looking at services, exports, and mobility of labor into the EU. But what India fears, and when you look at data and we look at standards, India fears the standards of the EU being applied in India, competition policy, on labor standards, on environment, etc. So, India hasn't graduated yet to the level of advanced countries. We are still looking at trade in goods, trade in services, hopefully, but congruence of standards between India and the EU, congruence of standards between India and the US. Because remember, the TPP was all about standards. Having harmonious standards, mutual recognition agreements, etc. We are not at that level yet. So I think with the US, especially, that is trying to push intellectual property, competition policy, labor standards, environmental standard, it's going to be a little far away, but we can have mini deals with the US, just like we can have mini deals with the EU. But I will put these not on the back burner, but I will put them a little further away than the other agreements that we've spoken about, especially with the Middle East, the UAE, with Oman, even with Australia, and with the UK. I think EU and US are further down the horizon. But I think someday, when the stars are right and we have a confluence of certain things, we may be able to conclude a trade deal with the EU, and the United States. Remember, United States is one of our largest trading partners, and the EU is the second largest trading partner. So it makes absolute sense to get into trading agreements with them if we are able to overcome the political hurdles to concluding such deals.
So just to sum up, there's some welcome rethinking on the part of government as far as FTAs are concerned. The push towards an FTA with the UAE makes a lot of sense given the diaspora there. Those
Right.
with the EU and the US will require some very hard negotiation from what I've been able to gather. And
Right.
India needs to be clear about what is feasible and what is practical and how far it can go. On that
Right.
note, Rajat Kathuria, thank you very much for your insight and that perspective.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on the show.
And for all of you out there who have been tuning into this conversation on FTAs, keep coming to us with your comments, observations, and your questions. Follow us, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and other social media. Thank you and good night.